Hey everyone, welcome back to HD Reddit Reads. Today's topic is Doctors of Reddit, what is the strangest thing a patient said they had that turned out to be true? Let's get into it. Not a doctor, but a combat medic in the army. Had a private heat stroke on me, and on his journeys back and forth between consciousness, he stated, "My butthole hurt, but feels really good too," in a slurred outburst. I looked at him, trying not to burst out laughing. "Why yes, Private, there's a rectal thermometer in your no-no square." Not a doctor, but a patient. In January this year, the side of my face grew bigger and bigger, and I was in extreme pain. I go to my GP and tell him, "Looks like mumps, don't you think?" But he brushes it off, saying, "I got my vaccines." He sends me to the ER because he does not know what I have and how to treat it. After 5 hours in the ER, they finally get my blood tested for mumps. Turns out you can still have the mumps even though you're vaccinated. I'm an OBGYN resident. This one still freaks me out. As a med student, had a superbly kind of funny pregnant patient with mild hypertension, IVF twin pregnancies, conceived overseas, little older than usual, slightly overweight, previous C-section. Nothing really remarkable, just a few risk factors altogether. She came to high-risk clinic, and the fetal heart tracing was a bit too quiet. Not scary, just not great. Maternal fetal medicine subspecialist doctor said she would go for delivery. The lady and I were chatting. She was from the same city as my then girlfriend and had a great sense of humor. Took the delivery news like a champ. Jokingly said, "Okay, but don't let me die. I want to meet your girlfriend after all this." We said goodbye. The nurse and I smiled and wished her well. The attending then said, "I don't like this. This is the kind of patient that smiles, looks good, then dies." Nurse and medical student me both thought he was crazy. She had a textbook, uncomplicated C-section, moved to recovery, 1 hour later suddenly lost her pulse, with essentially no warning and died of an amniotic fluid embolism. Amniotic fluid embolism, unpredictable, unpreventable, occurs in 1 out of every 20,000 to 50,000 births. I can still remember how she looked waving goodbye to us. I've seen a lot of people in a lot of different fields die, but this one still hurts my heart today. Worked on the ambulances for a stint when I was fresh out of uni. One day I was transferring to another country with an elderly patient with severe dementia. He didn't remember his own wife or even his name. The whole ride there, he was happily chatting away, telling me that he was an ex-international footballer, about his big victories and how he owned a business with David Beckham, mixed in with his other psychedelic nonsense. I just kept asking him questions to keep him occupied and chatting, but in my head I was thinking it was a funny side effect of his dementia. So we arrive at the new hospital, and his lovely wife is waiting there. Me and my crewmate transferred him to the hospital bed, and his wife shook our hands and thanked us profusely for being so kind with him. She said, "I know he's a bit of a handful. Did he say much on the way?" And I said, "Yes, he was telling us about being an international footballer, and he owned a business with David Beckham." She scoffs and says, "You told these nice people you were David's business partner? You only met him a couple of times." When I asked how he knew him, she explained that he had indeed been an international footballer player and was well known for heading the ball. In fact, the doctors thought that's why he developed dementia. I was so shocked, I'll never forget him. Obligatory, not a doctor, but a medical student. On my mental health placement, there was a guy I saw on a home visit who was convinced his neighbor was trying to kill him. This guy had a history of mental health problems, and the doctors were sure that he was psychotic, and all of this was in his head. However, a few days later, the doctor went around for another home visit and found his neighbor trying to climb through the window with an axe. The poor man wasn't psychotic at all. His neighbor was actually trying to murder him, and everyone thought he was just mad. My grandfather had schizophrenia and for years told us that someone was poisoning his water. We all ignored him until one day when one of the uncles tested his water and it turns out it was actually unsafe to drink. Everyone felt really bad for ignoring his complaints for years. However, it probably wasn't the Soviets who did it, as he claimed. A patient walked in the clinic with a complaint of fever. I noticed his hands were very yellow. He did have a history of alcoholism, but no other signs. I told him his hands suggested that he was jaundiced and will need tests. He laughed and said, "Oh no, I just dusted my hands with turmeric." I had bone replacement surgery, upper third of the tibia, and was fixed in place to heal with a titanium plaque and screws. One day the plaque broke, and I went to the ER and told the doctor that I had broken a piece of the titanium, and he called bullshit. His face after seeing the x-ray with the plaque separated in 2 pieces was priceless. I was the patient in this situation. In 7th grade, I was riding scooters with my little brother and I fell off when I hit a pothole. F Michigan. And when I fell, I put my arms out in front of me. I felt the worst pain in my right arm, right from my funny bone. I have never screamed so loud and I still had to walk home. My brother was freaked out and I kept telling him I broke my funny bone. I broke my funny bone. We finally get home and I tell my mom the same thing. She's a nurse, by the way. She didn't believe me and didn't even check my arm. I sat on the sofa for about 4 hours crying and saying I was in pain before she took me to the doctor. They took an x-ray and sure enough, I broke my ulna. My mom never even said sorry for not believing me and I had to wear a cast and everything. Plus, I had to go through months of, well, it wasn't very funny, was it? My daughter had a fall on the trampoline when she was 3. She let out this really weird scream, then went pale, quiet, and sweaty, and she wouldn't let us touch her arm. We only lived 5 minutes from the hospital, so I put her in the car and drove her there. She slept in the car. We get to the hospital and check in, and she's found her second wind. The triage nurse rolled her eyes at me when I asked for an x-ray, but ordered one anyway. At this point, my daughter was literally playing in the waiting room. I was starting to doubt myself. Even the x-ray technician was laughing at us. About 5 minutes after the x-ray is taken, a very red-faced triage nurse runs out of the waiting room and firmly tells me to stop my daughter from dancing. She's broken her arm and they don't know if she will need surgery or not. She didn't need surgery in the end, but spent 6 weeks in a plastered cast. It turns out she's a badass and has a great pain threshold. Love her. Not a doctor. Friend's son, age 2, came from a daycare, said he had stuck an acorn up his nose. Mom looked, no acorn. Around 2.5 boy develops chronic throat and sinus infections, has 8 courses of antibiotics a year. Age 4, boy is sent in for a tonsillectomy. Surgeon comes out of the theater, shows mom a moldy, rotten acorn. Turns out he did put an acorn up his nose. They left his tonsils in. Boy's ridiculously healthy ever since. Patient here. This is a case where the doctor called bullshit on what I said. Broke my arm once, there was a huge waiting time at the hospital, so I decided to go to another hospital the next morning. I slept really badly, but managed to have like 3 to 4 hours of sleep, instead of waiting the whole night awake in the waiting room. When I explained what happened to the doctor, she said it was not broken, because if it was, I would not be able to sleep. So I get used to the idea I did not break my arm. I stay there for scans, because it is swelled, and wait. The doctor came back with 2 pills of morphine, saying I had incredible pain tolerance, and that my arm broke at 3 places. She then explained I needed surgery the same day, and they're making place for it in the agenda. I can still remember her face when explaining to me the procedures of surgery, knowing she told me earlier it was not possible. Had a larger patient complaining of abdominal wall pain ever since they were headbutted by a goat. CT scans never identified anything. On a whim, got an ultrasound and saw this little cyst thing the size of a pea right where they said it was hurting. Told them no guarantee, but I'll be willing to cut it out to see if it helps. Ended up cutting out ellipse of the tissue where the cyst thing was, and all their pain was gone. Patient here. I broke the same rib 11 times over the course of 3 years, but the doctor often wouldn't even order an x-ray. She just said it wasn't healing right, give it time. I tell her there's something else going on. She dismisses me. Finally, after the 11th time, she says fine, we'll x-ray. X-ray shows a mass. Mass is biopsed. I have a tumor. The tumor was weakening the bone to the point that it had broke when I reached into the upper cabinet for sugar. Had that bad boy removed in 2018. 1 week hospital stay, worst surgery I can imagine, and now I'm doing great. Nurse. I had a patient in her late 70s talk about how her mom was upstairs and died last night. I used to work neuro, and so confused old people was our gig. So I just listened like, okay, wow, and did my job. I told another staff member about how she wouldn't stop talking about her mom being upstairs and dying last night. And they said, it's true. Her 98-year-old mother died in our ICU last night. I checked the roll in the morgue, and lo and behold, her mother's name was on it. Well, okay then. Reminds me of a patient of mine that came delirious but insisted her mother was alive. Patient was in his 70s. I thought it was a part of the delirium, but when he recovered, it actually turned out that his mother was in her 90s and still alive. I tore the ligaments in my knee when I was 12, and the doctor had a difficult time getting the stitches out. One broke and he decided to leave it under my skin, telling my parents it would dissolve. When I was 16, I banged my knee against something, and out popped the end of the stitch. I went to the doctor to get it removed. You could see a long curly blue thing under my skin. I insisted this was the remaining stitches. My doctor just thought it was a vein. She froze, a small area around the protruding stitch, and I pulled on it. She pulled out 2 or 3 inches of curly stitching. She held it up, looking shocked, and said, "I have to go show the other doctors this," and left the room. Thank you for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing. It'll be greatly appreciated. And if you want to visit the original thread, I'll link it in the description. But yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys in the next one.